Well, good afternoon, and I am once again totally excited. I'm here with Gravity Goldberg. She is a teacher, an author, a practitioner, researcher, and most importantly, she's a lifelong reader and writer. And she has been giving out tons of wonderful advice to teachers for years now. And in just a moment, I'm going to shut up, let her tell us about herself a little bit, and then we'll get into the two books that we want to talk about that Gravity has written. So it's all you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure and an honor to get to have the conversation with you. So what would you like me to start with?
Well, I'm thinking, tell us about you a little bit, because
Okay.
although you are incredibly famous, but there could very well be some folks out there that haven't heard of you and your work yet. So your
Of course.
background and that kind of thing.
Of course. So maybe I'll say that maybe like some of you listening, was the kind of kid who played teacher in school at a very young age. My favorite day of the year was back to school shopping in the first day of school, and my least favorite day of the year was the last day of school. So it was not a surprise to my family when I decided to be a teacher. The hard part for me was figuring out what kind of teacher I wanted to be. So I have taught lots of different grade levels in different places. So I've spent my career teaching elementary. I was a special educator. I was a reading teacher. I was a staff developer. Then I was a coach and I started to work at the high school level. Then I worked at the college level. Then I became a yoga teacher. So I think for me, what I realized is I am sort of hooked on the learning teaching relationships. I'm always interested in learning myself. And so I've taught almost everything, including I co-taught an honors chemistry class without ever taking honors chemistry myself, but I was the literacy counterpart of that.
Okay,
um,
so you're a
yeah,
teacher's teacher, and you forgot to mention your PhD. So someplace along in all that, you were able to do that. Okay, so are we ready to move to the questions now?
sure. Sounds
Okay.
great.
We're going to talk about two of your books. One of them is an oldie but goodie, Teach Like Yourself. And the other one's your brand new one, Active Learning 40 Teaching Methods to Engage Students in Every Class and Every Subject. So let's start with that oldie but goodie. And we've talked about some things you might talk about. So give us, what's this book all about? What can teachers pull away from it? A lot of my audience are practicing teachers and they're just looking for ideas, and you've got a bunch. So if they're going through this book, what kind of things do you want to tell them about the book and what they can find?
Yeah, so Teach Like Yourself is a little bit of a nod to me calling out we don't need to teach like pirates. We don't need to teach like champions. This is no disrespect to other authors, but honestly, the research and my experience working with teachers of every subject area across every grade level and almost every state is that we actually need to figure out what our own gifts and talents and core beliefs are and teach from there. And so this book, in a lot of ways, started off as an anti-teacher burnout book because a lot of teacher burnout stems from thinking we need to be something we are not, but actually turned into a sort of self-coaching book of how can we reclaim the reasons why we became a teacher? How do we get super crystal clear on what our goals are, what our core beliefs are, and then how do we live that every day in very manageable ways, not in the pie in the sky ways of what we think being a teacher is, but in the very real realities of that. And so it's really, to me, the most important way that we can stay in the classroom is to teach like ourselves. And I'll just say one other part of that is this stems from my deep belief in most of my research around making sure students get to learn like themselves, that we want students to have authentic learning experiences, but we can't offer that to students if we ourselves as teachers don't feel like we can teach in authentic ways. So that's sort of the big ideas, and you can see I'm pretty passionate about that, where this book came from.
Okay, I am impressed. I do have a little, like a good reporter, I've got a follow-up question. And that
Yeah.
is, okay, I'm going to put you on the spot. I need, if I'm a practicing teacher and I'm roaming through that book, what are two really great tips just two, any two really great tips that they'd find in that book. And you don't have to tell me the page, you just have to tell me what they should be looking for.
That's good because I probably can't tell you the page. I also wrote this book while I was pregnant with my first child, and so I definitely don't remember that. Um, I think the one that right now comes to mind, because it's one I work on all the time, is remembering that we don't need to actually be the entertainer as the teacher if that's not who we are. That really, when we bring a lens of curiosity, that actually is the most engaging way to engage the students that we work with. That when we are genuinely curious about the students in our classroom, as opposed to feeling like we are the ones who know it all, that it opens up so much possibility for ourselves and our students. And so oftentimes I would say, like, I'm going to make up a number, but let's just say like 90% of the time when we're stuck or facing challenges as a teacher, maybe to ask ourselves, like, what can I be more curious about? And that almost always leads us down a doorway of more success. So I think that's one big tip, this idea of how do we harness our own curiosity. And then I think a second part of that is some of the research that Amy Cuddy and her teams have done. She's a psychologist, and she's the one that maybe some people know from her very famous TED Talk of the power pose, of why the Wonder Woman pose makes us feel physically powerful. But there's all this nuance to her work. And the piece that resonated most with me that I talk about in Teach Like Yourself and my own connections to teaching is we actually can prime our brains to feel a sense of empowerment that we can't actually expect someone else to empower us. We can't empower someone else, but we can prime our brains to feel very powerful. And that a lot of it has to do with the self-talk that we have, and that simply starting our day or starting that class period that's tricky, or that meeting, or whatever that thing is might be, by intentionally taking 10 to 30 seconds to recall a time in your life where you felt powerful, and then entering the space after you've taken the time to visualize and envision that, actually sets your whole posture up, your whole way of being, your self-confidence to feel powerful. And I think now more than ever, teachers need to feel empowered. And rather than waiting for someone to give that to us, we can give that to ourselves by thinking it. And I'll just say one little caveat, that 30 seconds of picturing yourself in a previously powerful time doesn't have to have anything to do with teaching. It just has to be some authentic moment in your life where you felt that way. So those are two of the many tips that I think are free and easy to implement, and we don't need district permission.
Okay. And a lot of my followers are practicing teachers, and they need tips like that. I need tips like that. And I'm hoping that that will cause at least some of them to get interested in this book and maybe dive in. And thank you. All right, well, let's get into the other book. Now, I think I told you that I am involved every year with a conference here in Missouri called the Right to Learn Conference. And our audience for that conference is usually secondary. And my good friend Willie Wood is going to love the fact I just put in a plug for him. He's the conference will be happening again this year. And these secondary teachers are always asking, I've been to that conference for years. They're always saying, what can we do? Especially what can we do with reading? And it just, when I saw the title of this new book, it was kind of, oh my gosh, got to bring this one up and have, especially have those people at that conference and every secondary teacher have a look at things. So I'm going to handle it the same way. Tell us a little bit about what's in this new book, and give us one or two things that might help our friends who teach those grades 6 through 12. And I might even revise it and say I've kind of looked at the book and think some of it might apply to even the teachers of young kids. So there's your lead in. It's all you now. Have at it.
Thank you. I want to just start by acknowledging my co-author on this book. So this book was co-written with Barry Gilmore, and it was actually his baby of the book. But unfortunately, while Barry was working on the early stages of this book, he got diagnosed with cancer and couldn't finish it on his own. So I came in as second author and helped create it. This was pre-COVID, and unfortunately, he did pass away at the end of 2019. And so this book sat for quite a while I grieved, and then the world stopped. And then I came back to it about a year and a half ago with really fresh eyes and a new title. And so the book is called Active Learning because one of the things that teachers were telling me, K to 12, to be honest, not just at the secondary level, over and over again, was how there seemed to be lackluster engagement with students, how some of the taken for granted curiosity that students brought to classrooms and the way that they showed up in the classroom wasn't quite there. And at first they thought it was because of screens, and then they thought it was because of masks. And then we realized maybe it's our whole way we're orienting and designing our classroom experiences need to be rethought. And so the book now has some tried and true ideas, which I'll share in a moment, but also some like, what did we learn in a COVID, and I don't ever want to say post-COVID, but at least a more normal schooling situation that we want to carry forward with us. And so the idea of active learning first was to think about being active in three main ways. That we want to be physically active, that when we come to school, we are not just brains, right? That we have these bodies. And I'm super nerdy around the fields of embodied cognition and how our bodies impact our learning. So there's the physically active part of it. And, you know, if you're an English teacher, I don't mean that you're having your students do push-ups and cartwheels, but we can talk about what that could look like. That we're intellectually active, right? That we're grappling and thinking and really intellectually challenged to do that level of activity, but then also emotionally active, that we're developing empathy, that we're understanding perspective taking, that we are taking the time to recognize that we are physical, emotional, and thinking beings. And so from there, we had this massive list of what does that look like in the classroom? And we pared it back to 40 because that just felt manageable. And each of these 40 methods that we decided to curate for the book tap into one, two, or all three of those ways of being active. And I'll just name some that we can all go, oh, good, I already do that. And then maybe some that are a little bit new. And even the ones that are, oh, good, we already do that. I tried to imagine them in a very much 2023, like, what does this look like now? Because it might even have looked different 4 or 5 years ago. So here's an example of a, oh, good, I already do that. Might be something like think, pair, share, where instead of calling on individuals, asking a question and asking one student to raise their hand, that every student is called upon to think. Everyone is intellectually active. Right? Everyone is sharing and physically active, talking with one another, acting something out, role playing something, and then invited to share it. And so that's something that I think almost every first grade teacher does. And if you're listening and you're an elementary teacher, you can go, oh, good, I do that. I didn't necessarily think that many high school science teachers or social studies teachers at the middle school level or math teachers know this. So part of what we're trying to do is say, these are tried and true methods that work across content areas that even an English teacher who might be used to doing it can do more of it, and other teachers can too. And then we dedicated a good amount to some newer ideas. And I'm not saying we invented all of these are research-based, but ones that don't maybe get as much attention that most teachers we don't see doing. And most of them have to do with critical literacy and taking on more controversial topics. That one of the things I heard over and over again from teachers is how, for lack of a better word, scary it can be to bring controversy, or not, bring controversy out of the classroom, but to allow it to exist. Because teachers don't want to be on a Facebook page getting slammed by parents. They don't want to be misunderstood and quoted on social media. They don't want to be in jeopardy of losing their jobs. And so we really tried to tackle, like, how do we, without us bringing in our own perspectives, create clear ways that students can clarify their perspectives, understand how to read and view media critically, and then have critical discourse. So there's a real civic mindedness to some of those ideas. There's a whole lot more, there's 40 of them, but those are a couple I'll highlight for you right now.
Okay. I'll do a little bit of, I'm changing the gallery picture again. Okay, I'll do a little bit of talk on my own here. I would point out to my colleagues, secondary colleagues who will be there for that conference, just among others, that if we're naming anything you haven't heard of yet, and it's very possible that's possible, go back and look at your content area teaching book, and you'll find that, well, I know for sure Think Pair Share was in the one that I taught from. So go back and take a look at that, or there are other ways to find out. But I think there are techniques that we see more at a secondary, more at the primary level, and we don't see them at the secondary level. And I just can't wait to dig into this book. Okay, so that all said, what have we left? We've talked about your two books, and I'll tell you, I already have my copies. And by the way, these days I'm turning, my bookshelves are getting so crowded. I'm turning and buying Kindle these days, which, by the way, lets you bookmark things and all kinds of goodies like that. So I've got those two copies, and can't wait to dive into them a little more. So we've hopefully got the audience interested in those two. But now it's time to ask you, what have we left out of this questioning? What's anything else on your mind? And or it's, once again, you don't have to say anything, but if you've got anything to say about anything, now's the time. It's all you.
You know, I do. I mean, I know we're getting to know each other. I'm never someone who has nothing to say. But
I kind of do
that. Especially when it comes to teaching and learning. But I mean, honestly, to get serious here for a moment, like many teachers right now, there's things that keep me up at night. And what's keeping me up these days is the ways in which very small ways and very explicit big ways, teacher autonomy and teacher agency is under attack. And what I mean by that, with all those fancy words, right, is just this idea that teachers can't be trusted to make decisions. And it is abundantly clear in my own experience of 23 years of being an educator of all those different areas I said, and the literally thousands of classrooms that I've worked within, that the person making decisions about what is taught and how it's taught needs to be the person that is in the classroom every single day. And that when we resort to allowing people who have never met our students to make the decisions about what happens in our classroom, even if those are research people, even if it's me who wrote a book, like, I don't know more than you, right? That teachers need to remember that they are the experts and to trust themselves. And that we go to books, we go to resources, we go to research because that's what it's part of what it is to be a professional. But the other part of being a professional is trusting ourselves and our knowledge of our students. And so I just wanted to end by talking about, like, teaching like ourselves and creative active learning communities and experiences feels so important to me right now, because I worry if we don't do that, then the whole profession of teaching and the whole authenticity and joy of learning is no longer going to exist. It feels that important to me. So I guess my last message to teachers is to trust yourself. That's so, so important.
Okay. And I spent quite a number of years teaching teachers. I still do in-service work and the rest. And oftentimes my advice, especially these days, is as you're doing all this, it's all with the caveat within the district curriculum. And I'm very much in favor of giving districts the power that seems to be being taken away from them. That's Sam on a soapbox now. I think to some degree what's happening is taking away the powers of districts to create their own, or to, implement their own curriculum. And I think that's my personal concern. But for the teachers to keep, I want to keep them employed. So within, be empowered, but be empowered within that district curriculum. And that's Sam talking. Sorry, but I just had to chime in on that.
Of course, that part of being a professional is your job is to teach standards, but your primary job is to teach students to master those standards. So it's that, right, that dance between the two. I'm not at all suggesting, trusting teachers to do things that are beyond the bounds of what's appropriate in your school or district. But the sequence of when you do things, what students need within the bounds of your curriculum and your standards, that like, you know best about that. You're with those students every single day.
Thank you. And I just needed, I knew you knew that, but I just wanted to make sure
Of
everyone in
course.
the audience was aware. Okay, that all said, we have kind of wrapped things up here, and I'm so excited. I haven't had a chance to dig into the new book the way I want to yet, but that's certainly bubbled to the top of my to-do list. And now we have one final Bomarito tradition, and that is the famous Zoom wave goodbye. So at this point, I'm doing that, and if you'll do that, and thank you so much for doing this interview, and thank you so much for everything you've done and are doing for the literacy world. And good afternoon.
Thank you.